truly believe that I need to follow what feels right at the time and what I'm interested in at the time. I like putting myself in situations where I need to learn and adapt really quickly. I think that's one of the things I do enjoy is putting myself in a kind of uncomfortable situation and having to learn.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The pause on international travel has had an impact on many lives. Some have been stranded abroad and had to bide their time until a seat on a plane becomes available to come home. Others have missed out on opportunities further afield because they have no means of taking the adventure they'd intended. But for some, that roadblock has created new opportunities to express their creativity. Anna Ugarte is the head chef of the Old Fitzroy Hotel in Sydney. Anna, how are you going?
I'm well. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to have you on the show. You're meant to be in Spain or in Basque country at the moment, but the pandemic kind of got in the way. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I was supposed to leave to go and work in Spain probably like 3 days before the lockdown happened last year. I was supposed to fly, and I kind of like got to a point where I was so convinced that I was still going to go, even though there was a pandemic going. And everyone around me kind of turned around and was like, you can't leave. Like, I know you could probably still get into the country, but what's going to happen? And I'm so glad I didn't, because I was supposed to go and work with a friend in Ibiza for the summer. And I would have just ended up being stuck. It would have been the middle of summer on a beautiful island, but I would have been stuck in an apartment just like looking out the window for maybe 3 or 4 months. So, I mean, it's like I'm very lucky, and everyone who I tell that story to now just expresses like, even though I'm missing out, I'm still very lucky to have been caught in the right place, I guess.
Well, you've had an incredible sort of 2 years in some ways. You've won the Josephine Pignolet Award, and part of that you wanted to go to Basque country. Can you tell us about what your plans were with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my family is from Spain, from the north of Spain. All of the family that lived there now live in Santander, which is not technically in the Basque country, but I spent a lot of time in that part of the world, and I love it. And I was going to hopefully intern at Asador Etxebarri, which would have been pretty spectacular. I'm still hoping to go eventually. I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but yeah. I mean, I'd never actually been to the restaurant though. I worked for Lennox Hasty at Fyador for a couple of years when they first opened, and heard a lot about it from him. But yeah, it was always closed because they closed for like the summer season or something. They closed for like 2 or 3 months. So whenever I've been there, they've been closed.
Well, what was it like winning the Josephine Pignolet Award? Can you tell us about the process and what impact it's had on you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing because, when I first started cooking, I think it was the year that Lauren Elridge won, and she was the first female to win the award. And I think that was kind of, I knew about it and I knew how important it was, but then it kind of clicked that, maybe it could be something that I could do one day. And because I started cooking quite late, I guess, by regular standards, I kind of decided to set myself a couple of goals to kind of push myself, because I knew that I had a lot of catching up to do. And if I didn't, I'd just end up like, I kind of decided if I was going to cook, I needed to push myself. So I guess in a way, I didn't actually sit down with myself and be like, one day I'm going to win the JP award, but it definitely was on my mind. And I went and interned at Noma for the opening of their Noma 2.0. I was part of the opening stagiaire team, which was super great. At the end of that, Renee was kind of like, hey, like maybe do you want to trial for a job here, blah, blah. And in the back of my mind, I was like, well, I kind of want to go home because I was I don't know, 27 at the time. I was like, I want to go home because I do kind of still have this feeling of unfinished business, and I kind of wanted to put myself out there for at least once for the JP Award. And I ended up winning, which was a huge surprise, actually. I kind of guess I just wanted to be a part of the process and, go through that. But it was great. I had a great time. It was really nice meeting all the other chefs who were part of it as well, who I still keep in contact with. So that's also a nice part.
You came to a cooking career later than some. Tell us about your childhood day. What was food like? When did food become interesting and part of your life?
I guess it always was. My parents both worked in hospitality. They met in the commercial cookery class at Ride TAFE, like
Wow.
however many years ago. They neither of them were actually studying to become chefs. It was just part of the hospitality course, I think. But they ended up moving over to London and working in hotels and restaurants, and then moved back to take over my grandfather's like a motel and restaurant in Coffs Harbour when they were like 22 or 23, which is where I was born. And then they moved back to Sydney and opened a restaurant, and then worked in um, hospitality training. My dad was the head of school at Billy Blue for a while, and my mum also worked as a teacher there. So they were both pretty, like, I remember as a kid sitting at the dining table and them talking about all of the really about hospitality training and finding it incredibly boring. But they were also both great cooks, and on the weekends they cooked a lot. So I guess it's always been around. I think I've always kind of thought of food as quite special because they put a lot of emphasis on it. Like it wasn't necessarily like chefs or super fancy restaurants, but just the like occasion of eating, and yeah, eating with family and with friends.
With Australia being such a big country, motels have been an important part of all of our lives as we get in the car and travel. What's your memories of your grandfather's motel and restaurant?
Well, a lot of people would actually know it because it's a bit of a landmark. It's the big windmill in Coffs Harbour. So it's on the main road when you're driving up the coast, and it's on the left. It's now like in basically the industrial area of Coffs Harbour, but it used to be on a nice little hillside. It's a massive windmill built into the side of the hill, and it serves Dutch. But he was Dutch, so it was a Dutch restaurant. And my memories of that are small, but I've gone back a few times over the years. But I think the cool thing I remember my grandma telling me about motels because her and my grandfather built a few along the east coast of Australia, how it was such a huge part of like transportation around Australia because the Greyhound buses would be the main way that people would get places. And so every afternoon they'd have busloads of people who'd arrive and then in the morning leave at 5 a.m. It was a bit like clockwork, kind of like airports now.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you came to cooking late, or you were a late starter. Tell us about that time before that. You went to university, and what was the trigger to go into food?
Uh, I so I guess I started cooking when I was about 22, 23, 22. Um, I was at university. I was studying an arts degree at Sydney. I finished it actually. It's the arts degree at Sydney. My plan was to become a news journalist, and I was working. But I kind of the first few years of university, I worked front of house at some cafes and then a couple of small wine bars. And I guess working at those wine bars, it was just when the licensing in Sydney kind of switched over so you could have those small bars. It was the first time that I worked with people who were kind of really interested in the world of food and wine and more in a career sense. And I just found it really, I think this is what most people would say, I found it really intoxicating to be around people who are so committed and also just like the like crazy lifestyle of hospitality. Like it's different from the like 9 to 5 jobs that I'd been kind of training myself up for at university. And so then I stopped working in hospitality to go and take a job at the ABC, which I worked at for about a year. It was just a admin job in business affairs, but with the idea that I was going to end up in the news department. And I really missed working in hospitality. And so I think I had a little bit of a crisis. I went to New York for a couple of months to visit a friend. And then I came back and went out to dinner with one of my closest friends, Maddie. And it was a restaurant called Stanley Street Merchants down on Crown Street, which pop up with Matt Stone and Joe Barrett and stuff. And it had been open a few days. And I think Matt came up to us because we were sitting at the bar and was like, you guys don't know any chefs in Sydney, do you? Like, we're from Melbourne. We don't really have anyone. And I was like, no idea. I didn't have a job at the time. I was like, no idea, whatever. And Maddie was like, she was like, you don't have a job. Like, you're a pretty good cook. Like, you should, maybe you should, you've worked in hospitality. Maybe you should give it a go. And I'm like, no way. I have no clue what I would be doing. And so then I have no idea why I said yes, but I went for a trial and ended up being their breakfast chef for 3 or 4 months while they were up here, and ended up covering a few dinner services. And I remember that for like the first dinner service I ever worked, and Joe came up to me and like tucked a tea towel in my apron in the right spot and gave me a palette knife and showed me how to set up my section. And then we proceeded to do service. And I remember watching them being like, oh, wow, it's so amazing how well these people do their job. Like it was, I think I was pretty lucky because I straight away worked with chefs who are really talented. So I knew what it looked like in reality. But yeah, and I just kind of, I guess I just wanted to be in that position where you're just so skilled at doing your job that you can just, work a busy service. Like, I don't know, it seemed so appealing to me. So yeah, and then I finished my degree and worked part-time around the place. And then through a friend of a friend, got a call from Lennox when he was opening Fire Door, because I think they were pretty short-staffed, and he employed me as a commie chef, which was my first full-time chef's job. So yeah, and then I just went from there. So I kind of made the jump straight from working super part-time to working there, and I never really looked back, I guess.
Well, Fire Door kind of changed the conversation of cooking over fire in Sydney and Australia. It was really happening in quite a few venues, but Lennox approach is a little bit different. Tell us about that time and working with Lennox.
Well, I remember I think for me, it was a big time of change because I was moving into working full-time kitchen hours, which is pretty hectic from not working full-time kitchen hours. But I also remember, I think I'm really lucky because cooking the way Lennox does with fire is so much about like touch and feel. And so you're very, very connected to what you're actually doing. It's not like, presetting the temperature on a sous vide machine or, putting, and like, not that that's a bad way of cooking, but I think it just taught me a lot about, the direct relationship between like what you do and the result you get from the food you're cooking, which I think is a really good place to start. But yeah, it was really lovely. I mean, I was so junior. But I did get along with Lennox really well, and he taught me a lot personally. Well, yeah, I remember when I left Fire Door and I worked at another restaurant. They had a combi oven, which is one of the big combination ovens. It's basically a computer, and I had no idea what it was, and I was so confused. And I think that says a lot about my first foray into the cooking world, because it was super pared back. But I think that set me up quite well, realistically.
You've worked at some pretty incredible restaurants, Fire Door, Hubert, Noma 2.0, Momofuku, Siobo. What's been the real important moments in your career so far that have influenced where you are now?
I would say it's definitely hard to pinpoint one. I think in each restaurant you work in kind of builds upon what you already have, and you take very different things from each place depending on what they are. Like, working at Hubert, I remember realizing how much like organization, or how much like being a chef is about organization and like planning and making sure that everything, like you need to be looking ahead in time, like the rest of the week or whatever, to make sure your mise en place is completely tight, because the restaurant was so busy and so big. And then working at Noma, I mean, I just was a stagiaire there, which is definitely very different from having a full-time job. But I guess it was just like I remember very specifically the crazy energy that everyone there seemed to have. Like, you'd get there at 7 a.m. in the morning and look down the barrel of a day where you'd finish at 11 or 12. But there was never a point where anyone seemed like lethargic or was like, oh, don't want to be here. It was it was like everyone got there at 7 and just started running. And it was a crazy vibe. It was totally psycho, but in a really exciting way. Because, I think even now, if I was trying to get myself up at 6 in the morning to do a full day of service and dinner service, I'd really struggle. But it was something really intoxicating about being around a whole group of people who are just so like wildly Driven. I don't know if it was driven, maybe it was just like scared, but either way. Yeah.
Paul Carmichael is a bit of an enigma and a beautiful cook and a beautiful man. What was it like working in his kitchen at Momofuku Sioba?
I loved working for Paul. I remember I got the job with him after we just had a phone call after one night when I'd finished working service at Noma, and we just spoke on the phone for about an hour about life and cooking and what we envisage like the workplaces to be and how people work and stuff. And after that phone call, he was like, "Well, when we've got an opening, I'd love to have you in." And so I just kind of started there. And I feel like Paul taught me so much about, like, I think I went in there, I definitely didn't think I knew everything about cooking, but you've been working for a few years and you feel like you've at least got a good grasp of it. But I remember him really drilling into me how important it is to like really taste everything you're doing and not necessarily rely on recipes for sure, but that ingredients change, seasons change, even depending on the day or whatever. There's lots of things that change. And so the only thing you can really rely on is your taste. And so I think in terms of like a palate, that's what really developed for me when I was there. And I suppose that's why he's such a beautiful cook, is because he's it's one of those things that he's so reliant on. And it's definitely one of the most important things that I've learned in my career, and something I still I take now for granted in myself, that you just do that. And I suppose I'm not saying that lots of cooks don't, but it's still one of the things that you need to remind people to do sometimes, or it's a good thing to remember just in general.
Well, you're not over in Spain like you expected, but you have got a new gig at a glorious old establishment in Sydney at the Old Fitzroy. Tell us about how that gig came about and what you've been doing there.
Well, it came about in a very roundabout way through a friend's parents who know the new owners of the building, and kind of were asking me. We were just chatting about something else, and they vaguely mentioned that they knew someone who was looking for a head chef for a pub in Woolloomooloo. And to be honest, it was kind of like the last. Like I had no idea what I was going to do next. I didn't know where I wanted to work, or the restaurants I did want to work at didn't have any openings. And so I was kind of like, sure, whatever. Like, it's not going to hurt to have a chat. And then I went and spoke to the guys from Odd Culture, who are my new bosses. And I think in the first interview, it's the first time I'd been to the Fitz in a long time. Like, I'd been when Nick Hill was the head chef, but I hadn't really taken it in. And I remember just going in kind of without having thought about it too much, and then them sitting me down and being like, "So if you were the head chef here, what would you do?" And I hadn't really thought about it till that moment. And so I kind of like, I didn't make something up. I said what I thought was true. But they loved it, and they were like, "Well, we're looking for someone to come in who can not only just like provide regular pub food, but just kind of make this their own." And yeah, it kind of went from there. I had another interview with them, and I think one of the most, the things that really drew me to it was the connection that pub has with the local community, and also with the theatre, and being a place that's kind of like for everyone. It's not too, especially on a Saturday afternoon, like out the front of the pub, you'll see like a whole range of people from all walks of life, and it really seems like a welcoming place, and I love that.
Well, tell us a bit about your vision that you talked about that day, and what sort of food are you cooking there?
Yeah, I mean, that day I said what I wanted to cook, which is kind of like, I was like, I can see it feel kind of seaside, vaguely Mediterranean, Italian, Spanish, Frenchy, maybe lots of seafood, and and I was like, and I can definitely see a restaurant upstairs as opposed to just like an extension of the pub. I can see there being like different spaces that can have different food offerings, and kind of people can come in and either have like a restaurant experience or a pub experience. And that was my proposal. And I mean, since we've opened now, we've got the restaurant, which is opened upstairs, which has been really nice. But so far, We have just been running the same menu throughout the venue, which has been pretty good, except I feel like I am going to move towards having more separate food offerings in different spaces because I know also like from being Australian, knowing what a pub is, like I can want people who come to the pub to, order a beautiful fish main course, but realistically, most people, if you're going to the pub, you probably want to eat some snacks. You want to like something not too like not necessarily a full sit down meal, if you know what I mean. So going forward, I think as of this Friday, I'm actually going to start a bar menu downstairs with some more like snacky things that'll be a little bit more Spanish leaning, I think. I've got some really nice Spanish small goods, which I'm going to put on the menu. And yeah, I think the main thing that I've learnt over the last few months is that even if you've got a certain vision for a place, it's not necessarily what I don't know. It's what you want, but then you also need to be flexible as well. Like I don't think being rigid in a vision is always the right way to go. And so I've really like listened to I listened to my own feelings about it and also to all of our beautiful regulars and stuff who come into the pub. And I think that keeping the restaurant upstairs is like a special or not special, but as more of a restaurant, and then downstairs is more of like a snacky pub vibe is definitely where I'm heading. Yeah.
You've worked in some pretty amazing kitchens and now you're the leader in your kitchen. How do you run the kitchen and deal with staff?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm still learning. This is my first head chef job, and I feel like it's something that's really difficult to prepare yourself for before it happens. I guess over the years, I've definitely taken note of things that I appreciate and things that I don't appreciate in bosses, like my own and other people's. But when it comes down to it, especially when you're like going through the motions of opening a venue, which you've never done before, you kind of sometimes like I definitely like you can kind of lose touch with that, especially like I think for me my main thing has been like learning how to be a leader, because like I know that over the last few months there's been points where I've definitely like just got lost in the motions of like actually doing mise en place and cooking and struggling to get ready for service when you're completely in the shit, or like I have definitely lost sight of what it means to be like a leader, and I've needed to kind of take a step back and be like, even though I'm stressed and even though there's lots of things that need to get done, I also need to be a manager and look after my staff as well. And I definitely, looking back, there's so many times that I would have like changed. Like I haven't been horrible at all, but I definitely haven't been there to support people in the way that they probably needed to be supported. But that's the thing with these kind of jobs, is you learn as you go. Like there's no way for you to be perfect from the beginning, or if there is, I'd really like someone to tell me about it. But yeah, I think like even though it's only been 2 or 3 months, I think I've just been the learning curve. So I was joking to my boyfriend the other day, like the learning curve it's not been a curve, it's been more like a cliff that I kind of hit face on and I'm slowly kind of climbing. And I can see how much I've grown already, but I've got a long way to go.
With this greater role and more diverse sort of job that you find yourself in, how has it changed you? Has it changed your cooking and the way that you approach your craft?
I think that I've needed to be more realistic about what is achievable, especially considering, and I'm sure you've heard this from so many people, that there is a massive shortage of staff, kitchen staff at the moment, especially well-trained or experienced kitchen staff. So for me, it's been that balance of like, I know I have so many things that I want to do and implement and things I would love to put on the menu and ways I would like to cook things. But realistically, when you're looking down the barrel of a service, which is for both a pub, which is mostly like steaks, and then also a restaurant upstairs, which is, 3 courses, you need to make sure that the menu is streamlined enough that it's actually achievable, because the worst thing you can do is set yourself, like, you're basically setting yourself up for failure if you write this menu that's unachievable. And then, you know, everyone ends up unhappy. Like, the guests probably wait, your chefs have a terrible time, you're in the shit. Like, it's not pleasant for anyone. So I think in terms of my cooking in the restaurant, I've just needed to be really careful about what, at least for now, like, at least until we have a full team of people, because I definitely don't have that and have never had that since we opened the pub. I need to be really careful and strategic about writing the menu, because you need to make it achievable first and foremost. Also delicious. That's actually the first and foremost thing. But then, you know, manageable.
You didn't expect to see yourself in a pub, but you're creating and doing amazing things there. What do you see in your future in regards to food, and what road do you see yourself going down?
I have always struggled with this question, because I truly believe that me personally, I need to follow what feels right at the time and what I'm interested in at the time. And then so far I've always ended up in the place that felt right as well. So I don't want to be too prescriptive with what I want in the future, but I can see I definitely really like moving in stages of like I like putting myself in situations where I need to learn and adapt really quickly. And that's both, like, I guess what I'm doing now, but also in the future I can say, like, I'd love to put myself in a situation where I'm working at like some crazy 3 Michelin star restaurant and just like as a CDP and just learning heaps in that situation as well. Like, I'm not necessarily like, but that being said, I could stay at the pub for like years and years. I don't really know. So I don't know, but I think that's one of the things I do enjoy is putting myself in a kind of uncomfortable situation and having to learn. Yeah, it's hard to say. I want to just always do things that make me feel like, I don't know, I'm not going to say good, but feel like I'm making progress. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Do you see yourself going over to Spain eventually to work?
Well, you know, at some point I do still need to go and do my Josephine Pignolet internship. Like, the cash is still sitting in my bank account. Like, I have to do that. And, you know, you need to write a journal and submit that to Good Food and stuff. And I have every intention of doing that when I can, because, you know, that's part of winning the award, is going overseas and learning and then bringing it back to Australia is kind of the vibe. So yes, in one way, yes. I've also always wanted to learn Spanish, because I have a Spanish passport and I can't speak Spanish, and I find that rude. I'm actually going to get my passport renewed tomorrow, and going to the Spanish embassy is always a bit of a shit fight, because they don't speak to you in English there. So yeah. But yeah, I definitely will. I just don't know in what capacity. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to study, like, down the line, I'd love to go to the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Italy and do a Master's of Food Writing or something like that. I'm not sure, but there's lots of different options overseas.
Well, Anna, very much looking forward to see what you do in your career. You're doing amazing things at the Old Fitzroy already, and I think the world is your oyster. We look forward to catching up with you again and hearing all about it soon.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for chatting.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.